The engineer's hand shot towards the control. Michael's palm had just closed around the microphone, and the sound meters jumped into the red zone. 3 seconds earlier, nobody knew this take would change the rulebook. The control room at Motown Studio A smelled like electrical work and coffee gone cold. Recording tape spooled in lazy circles behind the glass, capturing the last bars of a song that had already eaten 11 takes. The Jackson 5 stood in a semicircle around the vocal microphone, each boy locked into the choreography of sound. 3 steps back after the verse, 2 forward for the bridge, never closer than 8 inches to the mic. The manual said 8 inches. The manual had been right for every Motown session since 1965. Michael stood center, eyes half closed, headphones slipping down one ear. He was 10 years old and already sang like someone who'd lived 3 lifetimes. The track underneath him pulsed, bass, drums, a clean guitar riff that looped like heartbeat. His brothers hit their marks. The harmony stacked perfect. And then Michael moved. Wait. Here's what nobody saw coming. He leaned. His left hand came up slow, fingers spreading across the mesh screen of the studio microphone, and he pulled the mic into his palm like he was catching a secret mid-flight. The sound that came out wasn't clean. It was gritty, close, soaked in the warmth of his breath hitting metal. The needle on the console kissed the red zone and hung there, trembling. "Cut! Cut the take!" The engineer's voice crackled through the speaker, sharp enough to stop the rhythm section cold. He was already halfway out of his chair, one hand still hovering over the volume control he'd almost killed. His name was Martin, stocky, graying at the temples, 20 years of sessions behind him and a reputation for pristine sound. He jabbed a finger at the glass. "You can't hold the mic like that. You're overloading the equipment." Michael pulled the headphones down around his neck and blinked at him. No defiance in his eyes. Just confusion. It felt right. "It's distorting." Martin tapped the meter with his pen, harder than necessary. "See that? Red means broken. We do it again, and you stay at 8 inches. That's the rule." The rule? Martin had built a career on rules. Every session was a negotiation between art and physics always won. But this kid didn't even know he was breaking the rules. He just knew what he felt. Remember this moment. It's where everything splits. On one side, decades of studio protocol. On the other, a 10-year-old's instinct. One of them was about to bend. But here's what the tape caught that nobody heard live. The line Michael had just sung, the one where his hand wrapped the screen, carried a rawness that made the lyric land different. It wasn't polished, it was present, like the kid wasn't singing to a microphone. He was singing to you. The producer sat in the back corner of the control room, a yellow legal pad, balanced on one knee. His name was David, younger than Martin, still learning how to hold his ground when the engineer got territorial. He'd been scribbling notes through every take, but now the pen had stopped. He leaned forward, squinting at the glass. "Play it back." Martin shook his head. "It's clipped. There's nothing to play." "Play it anyway." Martin's jaw worked for a second, then he spun the rewind knob. The reels reversed with a mechanical whine that filled the silence between them. Then the sound came. Michael's voice, cupped and close, pushing through the speakers with a weight that hadn't been there on take 7 or take 9. The brothers' harmony sat clean around it, but Michael's lead cut through like he was standing in the room instead of behind the glass. It didn't sound polished. It sounded real. David's hand went still on the notepad. Martin's jaw tightened. Then David stood and walked to the glass. He tapped it twice. Michael looked up, still uncertain. "Do it again," David said. "Exactly like that." 1 second, don't skip this part. This was the pivot. Not the moment Michael cupped the mic, the moment someone in authority said yes to it. The clock on the wall said 3:47 p.m. 18 minutes left in the session, and the label executive upstairs had already called twice asking when they'd have something to cut. Martin crossed his arms. If we let him do that, every vocalist in this building is going to start grabbing the mics. You know what that does to consistency? I know what it does to the song. David's voice was firm now. Michael looked up, waiting. Do it again. Exactly like that. Michael nodded. Small, certain. His brothers exchanged glances. Jackie raised an eyebrow, Tito shrugged, Marlon grinned like he'd just seen someone get away with something clever. But they reset to their marks. The tape rolled, the count clicked in, and this time, when Michael leaned into the mic and wrapped his hand around the screen, he didn't hesitate. He shaped the sound with his fingers, pulled back on the verse to let it breathe, pressed close on the bridge to make it ache. The meters danced red, and Martin sat rigid, his hand resting on the volume control like a man holding a leash on a dog that might bolt. His thumb twitched, once, twice, but he didn't touch it. Every instinct he'd honed over 2 decades screamed at him to pull the levels down, but something else whispered underneath. Doubt. What if the kid's right? What if the red zone is where they become real? By the time the song ended, his knuckles were white. What's really happening here isn't just an engineer holding back. It's 20 years of certainty cracking in real time. Notice the engineer's hand. It moved twice before anyone spoke. Once toward the talk button, once toward the stop switch. Both times it pulled back. David hit the intercom. That's the one. Michael slipped the headphones off and grinned, small and crooked, the kind of grin that didn't ask for approval because it already knew. His brothers clapped him on the shoulder as they filed out toward the lounge. But Michael stayed a beat longer, eyes on the control room glass, searching for something in Martin's face. Martin didn't look at him. He was already labeling the reel, black marker squeaking across the white tape. He wrote in bold letters, Take 13, vocal final. His hand was steady now, but his chest felt tight. David picked up the legal pad and headed for the door, then paused with his hand on the knob. You want to hear something, Martin? Martin didn't turn around. What? That's the sound people are going to remember. The door clicked shut. The control room went quiet except for the hum of the console. Martin sat alone, staring at the meters. The needles had settled back to 0, but the red marks they'd left on his memory were still bright. The producer's note sat folded on the console. Martin had seen David scribble something during take 9, but he'd been too focused on levels to care. Now, alone in the control room, he picked it up, unfolded it. The handwriting was quick, almost careless. Let him break it, that's where the magic is. Martin, and read it twice. His jaw worked. He wanted to crumple it, but he didn't. He smoothed the paper flat and set it next to the master reel. Then his hand went to the volume control one more time, fingers resting on the knob that controlled Michael's channel. He nudged it up a half notch. Just enough. Look closer at that gesture. It wasn't surrender. It was the first crack in the armor, the beginning of belief. Then the producer did something that reversed the whole standoff. He walked back into the control room 10 minutes later and played Take 13 at full volume. Hear what happened next. Not just the sound, but the silence before it. The held breath. The moment before certainty arrived. The sound filled the room like weather. Warm, unpredictable, impossible to ignore. Michael's voice rode the edge of control without ever falling off. The cupped screen added texture where there should have been clarity. The hot levels gave the performance urgency where there should have been polish. It shouldn't have worked, but it did. And Martin could feel it in his chest, the way a song lands when it's not just heard, but felt. When the playback ended, David let the silence hang. Martin closed his eyes. His shoulders dropped. When he opened them, something in his face had changed. "If this becomes a thing," he said quietly, "every singer's going to want to touch the mic." "Good," David said. Martin almost smiled. "You're going to ruin my reputation." "No," David said. "I'm going to make you remember why you got into this business." The tape stopped. The reels went still. And in the silence that followed, something shifted. Michael had found a seam, pressed his hand into it, and pulled out a sound that didn't exist in the manual. The engineer had tried to stop it. The producer had let it live. And somewhere in that friction, a technique was born that would outlast every session, every rule, every careful measurement of distance and volume. Martin labeled a second reel, writing carefully, "Safety copy, do not erase." David saw it and nodded. The studio went dark at 6 p.m. The Jackson 5 filed into a van outside, laughing about something Marlon had said. Michael sat by the window, quiet, watching the streetlights blur past like fireflies in slow motion. His palm still tingled where the metal mesh had pressed into his skin. He flexed his fingers once, twice, feeling the phantom echo. He didn't know that 20 years later, he'd cup a microphone on a stage in front of 50,000 people, and they'd scream before he even made a sound. He didn't know that engineers would spend decades trying to recreate the closeness and grit of that one-cupped hand. He didn't know that the technique would become so synonymous with his name that other singers would call it the Jackson grip. He just knew it had felt right, like the only honest way to deliver what the song was asking for. But here's what changed, step by step. By age 12, engineers started asking his opinion on mic placement. By 13, he was suggesting arrangement changes mid-session. By 15, producers were letting him sit at the board during mixing. The kid who cupped the mic became the man who controlled the sound. Jackie nudged him from the seat behind. "You okay?" Michael nodded, still watching the lights. "Yeah, just thinking." "About what?" "About how it sounded different." Jackie grinned, leaning forward so his chin rested on the back of Michael's seat. "That's because you broke the rules, little man." Michael turned back to the window. Outside, Detroit rolled past in shadows and neon. Maybe the rules were wrong. Notice the quiet in his voice. No triumph, no arrogance. Just certainty. Back in Studio A, the master reel sat in its box, labeled and logged. The meters were dark. The console was silent. And on the wall, in pencil, someone had written a note that would stay there until the studio closed in 1972. Sometimes the red zone is where the truth lives. Martin never told anyone he wrote it. David never asked. The song went to press 3 weeks later. It didn't chart as high as the label wanted, but DJs kept playing it anyway, and people kept calling the station asking who that was, how that kid made the microphone sound like it was breathing. The answer was in the tape, in the way a 10-year-old boy had ignored the rules long enough to invent a new one. And here's the part you can't miss. By the time Michael turned 12, every major studio in Detroit had engineers asking the same question: how close is too close? The answer, it turned out, depended on who was holding the mic.